And we'll start reading in Genesis 40, verses 1 through 7. Genesis 40, 1 through 7. Sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, and the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and he put them into custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. After they had been in custody for some time, each one of them had the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who had been being held prison, had a dream on the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials, who were in custody with him, in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" We have to kind of remember why Joseph is in the position that he's in. We don't want to lose track of how he ended up being in a place where he's having a conversation with two of Pharaoh's officials who are in the same prison where he is. So we'll go all the way back to his early days. For him to be where he was, he had to first be pampered by his daddy. That was step number one. If he had never been different from the other brothers, or if he had just been, a kid that was following along and a typical little brother, maybe he would have never been where he needed to be on this particular day. If he had never been given visions by God, which he reported to his brothers, he would have never been in the place that he was to do what he needed to do. Had he never been hated and sold by his brothers, he would have never been in the right place to do what he needed to do. Had he never been purchased by Potiphar, an official of the dynasty of Pharaoh, he would have never been in that prison at that time. If he had never been desired and lied about by Potiphar's wife, he would have never been in that place on that day. And God had to take all of those things and prosper Joseph so that he could be ready to do what he needed to do at that particular time. Now that's a series of sermons by itself, right? How many things do we go through in life and we look at them and we say, well, there's nothing good about that. There's nothing good about me being separated from my brothers, and there's nothing good about my brothers hating me, and I got sold into slavery, and I got lied about, I got thrown into prison, and I don't deserve it. Nothing good about any of that. But he's in exactly the place he needs to be at exactly the time he needs to be there. So God takes all of the things that have gone on in his life and he uses them for good. I think the same thing is true, perhaps to a lesser degree, in our lives. Joseph was a chosen vessel. I mean, he's different than us. We're not all going to have that same kind of treatment from God that Joseph gets. But if we allow God to use our life experiences, they mold us into the people that we are. And so when we run into a situation where God can use us, whatever the situation might be, and we've already got all the ammunition we need, then God can use us better than he might if we weren't prepared for that particular situation. I'd tell you a quick story about my mom. My mom had 5 different cancer surgeries. She had a double mastectomy, a hysterectomy, and then the cancer went to her appendix. They took the appendix out. She was getting ready to go on a mission trip to Poland. She told the doctor, "I'll come back and you can finish whatever you need to do in there when I get back." And the doctor says, "You better not." She said, "Hide and watch." And so she went to Poland and came back, and they did the final surgery. She lived to be 82, died last summer. But she was very useful in her later years when I would be ministering to someone and they would say, they have found out that I have breast cancer. Right? Never had the experience. Becky and I have been blessed so far that it hasn't entered into our family. But my mother's been there. And my mom and dad ran a Christian literature store. They had an 800 number. So, 1-800 call my mom. And I would just give out their phone number to people. And they would actually call my mother up, and she could counsel with them over the phone and let them know that, we're going to be able to get through this. It's going to be all right. Trust your doctors. Do what you need to do. Get through it. So Joseph was that guy. He had been through so many things that he was ready when God was ready to use him. We've been through so many things that each of us is uniquely prepared to do something good in the kingdom, maybe to the exception of every other person in the kingdom, the world around. Right? We may have exactly the right set of skills and knowledge when God needs us to do it. And if we'll step up and use what we've got, then God can use us in a great way. So lots of things had to happen. Both of these guys have dreams on the same night. So we're back into the dream sequences. You remember when Joseph had his own dreams and reported those. He didn't give interpretations because his dreams were so obvious to his brothers. Well, there were all of us out in the field, and we all had a sheaf of grain, and all of your sheaves of grain bowed down to my sheaf of grain. You don't have to go too far to get the understanding for that one. The sun and the moon and the 11 stars all bowed down to me. You don't have to go very far to get that. The brothers understood. Now, the cupbearer and the baker have dreams that once you know the interpretation, they make perfect sense, but they weren't as obvious as the dreams that Joseph had had. So let's keep reading in verse 8. It says, we both had dreams, but there is no one who can interpret them. Then Joseph said to them, do not the interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams. So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said to him, in my dream I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand. It's almost like time-lapse photography. As soon as I see the branch, it buds, and as soon as it buds, the grapes come out, and it's already ready to be harvested. And so I take the grapes, and I put them in Pharaoh's cup, and I hand Pharaoh the cup. Joseph says, this is what it means. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in the dungeon. Now the NIV has dungeon. When we're talking about prison up to this point, and him being kind of free to visit with the other people, I don't get a real horrible sense. It seems like a very clinical, not a free place, but a decent place to be. But then he uses that word dungeon, and dungeon is a different word for me than prison. And so he's unhappy, he's stuck in this place, but because he's stuck in this place, he's now an ambassador for God to interpret these dreams. So the first guy, the cupbearer, gets a very good interpretation, a very welcome interpretation. He is going to be returned to his former position, and all Joseph wants is when you get there, mention me to Pharaoh. Take it to the highest court. Make sure that Pharaoh is aware of my situation, and I've got people that can vouch for me if I can ever get my case heard, but I was thrown in here by no fault of my own. All right. Verse 16, when the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, he said to Joseph, I too had a dream. I feel for this guy. He sees that the answer to the cupbearer's dream was welcome and that things were going to go well for him. And he knows that his dream is fairly similar to the one that the cupbearer had. So he's all in. Joseph, I've got one too. Give me the good news about mine. Well, not so good news. On my head were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. This is what it means, Joseph said. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh. Not so encouraging, not good news for the baker. I went back and tried to do a little bit of investigation, and I think I have a timeline. Yeah, down at the end we'll talk about it more. But we're talking about Egypt somewhere around 1800 BC, somewhere in there. And the practice of impaling and cutting people's heads off was a great deterrent, right? If I take your head and put it on a pole out in front of the gate, other people will decide that that's a bad idea to do anything, against you. So it was a great deterrent. So one of them is going to get reinstated. The people who are friends of his are going to say, "Long live the Pharaoh. Pharaoh did a good job." The people who are friends of the baker are going to say, "Don't mess with Pharaoh." So everybody's going to end up with Pharaoh still large and in charge when this is over. There's nothing that's going to change as far as that's concerned. On the 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday. He gave a feast for all of his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. This lifting up the head is an interesting phrase. On the one case, he will lift up your head and restore you. In the other case, he will lift off your head and impale you. But the lifting up of the head was he brought them into court. He made them the center of attention. The thing that Joseph wanted is what they got on Pharaoh's birthday. He brought them in and put them out in the middle of everybody and said, "Let's check these cases and see what we need to do about the dispensation of these cases." And one of them is very happy. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand, but he impaled the chief baker, just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. So everything goes according to the plan. Everything goes according to the interpretations, but Joseph is still stuck in the prison. He's in a good place doing a good thing, but he's not happy. He's not getting what he needs personally. He doesn't have the freedom that he desires personally. But he's still in a place where he needs to be, doing what he needs to do. The prison overseer, the head guard, is being blessed. The people who are in the prison are well cared for. Joseph is doing what Joseph does. He's making sure everything's taking place like it's supposed to. But Joseph can't catch a break. He's not going to be allowed to get out of that prison for quite some time more. Probably the most important thing that happens in chapter 40 is that we establish Joseph's accuracy. When you look into the Old Testament, there are several passages, but there's a couple of passages I want us to look at that talk about how to receive different prophets. Right? There are lots and lots of prophets, even in the world today, or people that will claim that they are prophets. And particularly right now on the African continent, there are several big name prophets. And they have big followings, and they have big stadium-style healing sessions and those kinds of things. And I recently watched a couple of exposés on these guys about how they fool people and how they're able to get around the law in doing the things that they're doing. But go over to Deuteronomy. This is when the law has been given. In fact, just one of those things you can stick in the back of your mind. Deuteronomy comes from two words, deuteronomos, the second law. So when you read Exodus, you get the law of Moses given at Sinai, and as we read this morning, lots of different rules and regulations about building the tabernacle and that kind of thing. When you get to Deuteronomy, you get the law again, and different and a little bit more commentary on the law the second time. So Deutero the second, Nomos the law, Deuteronomy. So now you know stuff that your friends don't know. If you run, maybe you'll run into that one in Trivial Pursuit one day and be able to look like you know stuff. Chapter 13, beginning in verse 1. If a prophet or one who foretells by dreams appears among you and announces to you a sign or a wonder, and if the sign or wonder spoken of takes place, and the prophet says, let us follow other gods, that is, gods that you have not known, and let us worship them, you must not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer. The Lord your God is testing you to find out whether you love him with all your heart, with all your soul. It is the Lord your God you must follow, and him you must revere. Keep his commands and obey him. Serve him and hold fast to him. That prophet or dreamer must be put to death for inciting rebellion against the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, who redeemed you from the land of slavery. That prophet or dreamer tried to turn you from the way of the Lord your God, commanded you to follow from the way of the Lord your God, commanded you to follow. You must purge the evil from among you. And it goes on to talk about specific instances. Now run over to chapter 18, still in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 18:22. This one's a little bit more familiar, I think, to most folks. Deuteronomy 18:22. Well, let's start at 21. You may say to yourselves, how can we know when a message has not been spoken by the Lord? If what a prophet proclaims in the name of the Lord does not take place or come true, that is a message the Lord has not spoken. That prophet has spoken presumptuously, so do not be alarmed. So I think there's two things that I drew from this. You may get a third. Number one, they must be from the one true God. There are times in Scripture, I'll give you one Old Testament, one New Testament that will be familiar to you, where people got the right information from the wrong source. You remember when we were talking about Laban and Jacob? And Laban says about Jacob, I have figured out through divining that you're the reason that I'm getting rich. I don't want you to leave because I made inquiry basically of my gods, and my gods say that you're the reason I'm getting rich. Okay? Right information, wrong source. Okay? You get over to the New Testament, Paul and Silas are walking around in Philippi. There's a little girl who has a demon who's following them around, and she keeps yelling out, these are the servants of the Most High God who have come to tell you the way of salvation. Right information, wrong source. Right? So God says, don't follow these people. Don't get involved with them. If they're trying to take you away from following me, even if what they tell you is true, don't follow them. And the writer of Deuteronomy says, God's testing you. He wants to know if you're going to remain faithful. A lot more that we could talk about there, but we'll leave it alone. And then secondly, the message has to be accurate. Right? If they give you a message that's not accurate, and they say that it came from God, well, we know that God is truth, and if what you're telling us is not truth, then you can't possibly be from God. So that's the two things that I came up with from those passages. So we establish Joseph as a guy who's telling the truth, so his God is telling the truth. He's following the right God, he's got the right message, even when it's an unpopular message, which would be tough for me. I mean, I don't mind being the guy that tells the cupbearer, hey, guess what? You get to go back to work and you get out of prison. But when God gives me the interpretation for the baker's vision, I don't want to deliver that thing. When Samuel was asleep and the voice kept calling him down the hall, Samuel, and he'd get up and he'd run down to Eli, and Eli'd say, I didn't call you. He comes back, happens again. Eli says, I didn't call you. He says, next time you hear the voice, say, speak, Lord, your servant is listening. Okay? When we're little kids, that's as far as the story goes. He listened and God spoke to him. What did God tell Samuel? He told Samuel that Eli was going to be removed, his family was going to be removed, that they weren't godly, they weren't doing what they were supposed to do, so Hophni and Phinehas can't be my priests. He's going to kick them out. Samuel gets up in the morning and Eli says, God do so to you and even worse if you don't tell me what he told you last night. And so his first prophecy that we know of is to tell Eli some horrible news. I want to be the good prophet. I want to be the prophet that gets to bring good news. But prophets had to give whatever message the Lord gave them. And sometimes you could tell the truth of the prophet because they were willing to deliver a message that they did not want to have to deliver. We'll go on down through this some more next week when we talk about Pharaoh's dreams. But for now, just think Joseph's in the right place, doing the right thing, and God has established him as somebody who can bring you the interpretation of a dream. So he's right where he needs to be for God to take him to the next step. All right, let me throw this timeline out to you, and then we'll touch on it again probably next week and several weeks from now too. Right now we're in what's known as the Middle Kingdom, dynasty probably number 12. It's about the time that Joseph goes into Egypt. It lasted from 1994 to 1781 BC. I think that Joseph ended up somewhere in the 1700s in Egypt. So it's either the late part of the dynasty 12 or the early part of dynasty 13. They don't get back out of Egypt until around dynasty number 18, which is 1550 to 1298 BC. So much, there's going to be 400 years of Israelites in Egypt. It changes everything. Egyptian history only footnotes it maybe a little bit, but for the Israelites, this becomes the touchstone. This is the thing. When they come out of Egypt, the fact that God brings them out with a mighty hand and he says to them, you didn't choose me, I chose you. Right? You're my covenant people. It changes everything. And for that to happen, Joseph has to be in the right place at the right time doing the right thing.